One of the big questions about Dota is Divine Rapier, possibly the least understood item in the history of Dota 2. Nobody has ever known if this item causes more wins or more throws. It's been unknowable. Dota players love replays and summaries. There's a dozen ways to get statistics and aggregations about Dota matches and metagame. But nothing measures Divine Rapier, at least not accurately. It's like Schrodinger's item, simultaneously existing as the best item and the worst item in the game. To answer this question, I had to source over 70,000 game replays, discover an illicit ring of underground cheaters, build algorithms to detect misuse, and do kind of a lot of math. I'm going to go through it all. If you only care about the conclusions, check the timecodes in the description. And real fast, videos like this are an immense amount of work. I don't have a sponsor. This video is not monetized. I don't have a Patreon. I'm not asking you for your firstborn child in a wicker basket, but really please give this video a like, consider subscribing. If you're feeling zesty, leave a comment. I read them all. All right, that's enough of that. What is Divine Rapier? In Dota, Divine Rapier is an item that gives you a truly insane boost to your damage output, which you can use to kill enemies and take objectives. Items in Dota are generally permanent, but Divine Rapier is different. If you buy Divine Rapier and you die, it drops to the ground with your body. Enemy heroes can pick it up and wield it, and that makes it extremely difficult to measure. We've looked at Hand of Midas before, but Divine Rapier is a lot more difficult to analyze. Unlike Hand of Midas, Rapier is bought throughout the game in a very wide variety of circumstances. Sometimes you'll see Rapier at 15 minutes, sometimes an hour later. Sometimes the game ends 40 seconds later, and sometimes 40 minutes later. We do know that it was built in over 10% of pro Dota games in the last year. Almost always after the game has already reached an hour, and their team is at a big disadvantage. It's usually a last-ditch, desperate attempt to win a game that otherwise feels unwinnable. But outside of pro games, we see Rapier purchased in all sorts of circumstances. It turns out pub players have motivations other than winning. And one of those motivations is feeling super duper cool. So you get a lot of games where people just buy Rapier because it's fun and not because it's good. So if we want to figure out how the item actually works, we have to get a lot of games, categorize them, and analyze them. That alone is enough to stop most people from even considering this kind of work. Well, I'm not most people. I'm a man with a 20 terabyte network attached storage and a truly deeply unhealthy decades-long obsession with the 10th most popular game on Twitch. I kept the summaries of all the games I used in the Hand of Midas video, plus I downloaded a bunch more. Now we have 77,300 ranked games from about the last month, which is good because Rapier is a lot less common than Midas, which means we're going to need more games. Just like before, I went through and categorized each hero by role, core, support, and lane based on their behavior and farm throughout the game. But then I also mapped out every hero's net worth and item purchases 30 times per in-game second, and wrote out summaries of every game in 30-second chunks. If Rapier was ever purchased, I started tracking that hero to see how much damage they did, how long they held the Rapier, what mode the Rapier was in, and when, what their purchase time was, whether they dropped it, and if so, whether an opponent picked it up, the number of times they right-clicked a hero while holding it, how much building damage they did while holding it, and a bunch of stuff like that. Once I did this, I heavily compressed the replays down and discarded them because otherwise I would quickly run out of room to store them all. And this is where I start to hit another big hurdle. Look, I knew going into this that Divine Rapier was used to troll and feed, probably more than any other item. I know that there are cheaters and boosters and smurfs in Dota, and probably a lot more than most players realize. Look, I've never played in Herald, so I had no idea about the freight train of cheating that was about to hit my analysis. There's apparently this thing that happens in Herald. I can't estimate how often it happens, but it happens often enough that I noticed it repeatedly. Sometimes, a whole team will just announce that they don't plan on playing. Hey, free MR, we aren't going to play. Sometimes they don't say anything, but then they also never come to lane, and they never try to win. If I had to guess, these games happen because they are boosters trying to pair up with Confederate accounts. but once in a while they accidentally get matched against real opponents. Even if the players who are going to win don't want to have a free win, they have no choice. Once these boosters are in the game, legitimate players are held hostage. Valve will punish them if they abandon, so they have to wait until they can finish the game, even though nobody on the other side is trying. And the players who are stuck in this game often get bored and buy Divine Rapier to speed up how fast they can end the game. In the end, at least 14% of Herald tier Rapier purchases were in these fake games. And to make matters worse, that's not the only kind of edge case we need to control for here. Rapier is just too tempting for a special kind of jackass. So we want to know the impact Rapier has when it's purchased in a competitive, legitimate game. That means filtering out the impact of all this other crap. Now that we filtered out most of the trash games, we want to know what happened in all of the others. Really, the holy grail would be to know whether buying Rapier increased or decreased your odds of winning a game. To know that, we have to compare all the games where Rapier was not purchased to all the similar games where it was purchased. For more details on how this works, please go back and watch my video analyzing Hand of Midas. The process here is very similar. All you really need to remember is if I say win expectancy change or talk about improvement, what I am saying is that this is the change to your odds of winning when buying a Rapier. It already factors in the state of the game when you've bought it. Things are a little different from our Midas analysis though. In that one, I only had to make maybe 10 models for a few different roles and heroes. But for Rapier, I made over 100. But I know if I go and start talking about model fitting, some of you are going to glaze over like a donut bakery. Before I do that to you, let's first talk about some of the findings, and you can stick around if you want deep cuts, like exactly how the analysis worked and the details about when buying this item helped. Here are some basic facts. Divine Rapier is purchased in between 4 and 4.5% of all ranked games. About 58% of buyers go on to win their game. But 57% of purchases are happening when the player is already ahead. So that seemingly positive win rate is masking a complete collapse of win expectancy when the buyer already had an advantage in the game. The most Rapiers I found in a single game was 12. It was a 1 hour and 27 minute slug out where Zeus bought 7, his teammate Phantom Assassin bought 3, and their enemy Medusa bought 2. At the end of that game, 5 Rapiers were left on the ground. Actually, only 8 heroes never built Rapier in our sample. That's Lone Druid, Centaur Warrunner, Treant Protector, Grimstroke, Lich, Pugna, and Shadow Demon. Every other hero bought at least one. There was no magic-focused hero who did better with Divine Rapier than if they hadn't bought it. So Zeus, Techie, Storm Spirit, Queen of Pain, and Sand King are all examples of magic-focused heroes whose win expectancy drops when they buy Rapier. I'm not including Puck as a magic-focused hero, specifically because the Ganem Scepter upgrade to Dream Coil means that Puck can do an immense amount of attack-based damage. So here are the heroes that had the most Divine Rapier games. Another objection that I'm expecting this time is that, oh, well, the ranks are different. Getting a Rapier at Immortal rank is different than getting a Rapier at Herald rank. But every rank bought Divine Rapier about the same amount, with the exception of Archon. Archon players are just built different, man. In a 1-to-1 comparison against every other group, Archon is statistically different, and they buy more Rapiers reliably than any other rank. I have no idea why. I looked at this for hours probably, trying to see a trend or some anecdote that would explain this away. If you have an explanation, please comment and tell me. I really want to know what broke in the Archon mind that makes them buy so many more Rapiers. About 1 in 20 Archon games have a Rapier, which seems like a lot for such a controversial and risky item. Here you can see every rank buys Rapier in pretty similar situations at about the same rate, with the exception of Legend. Legend are the rank that seem to use Rapier, quote-unquote, properly the most, where they're not buying it from a net worth advantage, but instead buying it as a catch-up item or a last-ditch resort. I was a little surprised to see that there is some marginal gain to buying a Rapier while winning before 50 minutes, but the win expectancy changes that early are generally very modest, and it would be easy to find some less risky item that had similar levels of impact. What is clear is that Rapier is usually a bad idea to buy with a net worth advantage, especially in the late game. If your momentum has stalled, this item is probably not the solution. An analysis like this can't replace human judgment, it can only give you guidelines, like never spend more than 30% of your net worth on Rapier. Don't buy Rapier if you're very far ahead. If you're trying to make a comeback, don't buy Rapier until after 50 minutes into the game. You need to have a baseline for success before the Rapier is going to help you. As tempting as it is, do not buy Rapier to max out magic damage. Over and over and over again, I saw people do this, and it always leads to a decrease in average win expectancy. Of course, Rapier is a damage item. Now, look, it is true that the amount of damage Divine Rapier does isn't actually relevant to how impactful it is. Like, we could measure the win rates without actually knowing how much damage it's doing. But I am the wonder cow, and I could not stop wondering. And this got me into a whole morass. The problem with tracking damage is, at first it seems very simple, you just look at the combat log, but then you realize, well, the combat log is after armor, and also sometimes Divine is doing magic damage, and also sometimes abilities in the combat log are actually physical damage based on your core damage, and then there's also the case of critical strikes, which aren't labeled in the combat log. And the longer I worked with this, the more it was edge case after edge case after edge case until there really was not normal cases left. It got egregiously out of control. It would probably take like 6 minutes to go through for what could generously be called a side quest to this video. The important thing is that we ended up with this: the total average damage per second generated by Divine Rapier on each hero. This is specifically the increase in damage attributable to Divine Rapier itself. It's very predictable that Gyrocopter, Medusa, Luna, and Sven have the highest typical damage range, while burst heroes like Techies and Puck have the highest average damage output. That's partially because those heroes have smaller sample sizes and very large outliers. Techies' best game gave them 728 damage per second, attributable just to Divine Rapier alone, alongside plenty of games with effectively no damage output at all. So don't get any ideas. Buying Rapier on Techies does actually reduce your expected win rate by 10%, despite the damage output at its peak. Puck reached a staggering 1,465 damage per second, but Puck has escape mechanisms that can keep Rapier more reliably. That makes Puck one of the best heroes for Divine Rapier, increasing the hero's win rate by over 10%. So let's actually talk about win expectancy. That's the main metric we wanted to consider, and it's time we get into our regressions. In my last video, I just hand-waved a regression as a bit of math, but it's really not as hard as you might think. It's mostly equivalent to just drawing a straight line. A logistic regression checks for a relationship between inputs and a yes or no outcome. Let's do a very simple one-input example. Let's say we want to know if hours playing Dota predicts whether or not you lose your job. So first we just plot a line. The steepness of the line, or the slope, is a weight that we will initially just make up. And then the y-intercept, or the height of the line where it crosses the y-axis, is also a weight we will initially make up. Then we take a sample from our data and we plot the x, in this case, how many hours of Dota somebody played. After that, we'll have a corresponding value y, which is this line's best guess as to the outcome. In our case, whether or not this person was fired. There's a small bit of math here that collapses that y into a value between 0 and 1. Then we interpret a 1 to mean the model believes you are definitely going to be fired if you play that much Dota. Or 0 means you definitely will not be fired if you play that much Dota. After we've done this with all of our samples, we move on to draw another line. We can adjust the weights to draw a new line that makes better predictions. The best line is the one that assigns the highest probabilities to the outcomes that actually happened. To test this, we always use games not in the training set, because that way we know if our model is overfitted, which just means whether or not the model will work for games that you didn't train it on. So in our model, we've used 3 inputs: total net worth of team 1, total net worth of team 2, and the game time. But why just use net worth? If we can use any number of inputs, let's factor in stuff like hero level and map state and player rank and draft. For example, we could try to create a model that includes all of our net worth data and the game time data, but also considers the current state of every tower and barracks on the map. That would be a lot more information about the game. Our net worth model only has 3 metrics, while a robust model with building information would have 13. But that's a big pain in the ass, and it's not really guaranteed to make your model better. Everything in Dota already changes the net worth in approximate proportion to how valuable that occurrence is. Even ward quality is factored in. A good ward leads to fewer deaths, more kills, or safer farming, all of which change net worth over time. Remember how our output was collapsed from all of our inputs and our weights into a single value. If we throw multiple overlapping variables into our model, it will try to weigh them all simultaneously. In other words, it tries to find one solution that works for all cases. The problem of overlapping data is called multi-collinearity of signals. Just to be sure, I went and made a separate model for every permutation of these factors. Things like rank or objectives on the map did make small differences, but really there were no substantial differences between these models. The differences between equivalent models were very marginal. Models trained on later game windows were much better, but that's just because more of the game has already been played. Our default model is also more than 80% accurate if you're looking at games in a later game window, like between 30 and 35 minutes. So in the end, I decided to use the basic net worth model for simplicity. The improvements were just too minor, and in some cases it came at the expense of important metrics other than accuracy that I'm not going to get into here, but maybe in a future video. But whenever I'm talking about win expectancy in a game window, like between 30 and 40 minutes, for all of that data, I am using models specifically trained off that game window. Let's start just by looking at how often Rapier is built at various win expectancies. The x-axis here is the win expectancy just prior to buying Rapier, and the red bars are the total losses, while blue bars are total wins. I've included all games, including the fakes, trolls, feeders, and other illegitimate games, in this sample, so that you can see them. Let's remove those so that we can look at just the real games. And just a reminder that all the games on the far right are essentially guaranteed wins before Rapier was purchased. Based on the data, these players could really only lose in extreme circumstances, usually one due to immense hubris, like buying and losing a Rapier. For example, all of these games are where the buying team had every tier 2 still remaining, while the non-Rapier buying team was down to at most 1 barracks. The fact that there are any Rapier losses in the right 2 columns means that there are some very salty teammates out there. The dashboard we're about to look at will showcase the expected win rate changes with different game situations for Rapier purchases at different times of the game. The x-axis here is the buying team's net worth compared to their enemy's net worth. And the y-axis is the buyer's personal net worth versus the personal net worth of the equivalent opponent. So the top right corner means both the buyer and their team is absolutely crushing. They are way ahead. The top left means the buyer is doing great, but their team is not. The bottom left means the buyer and their team are both getting destroyed, and the bottom right means that the buyer is being carried by their team. The middle means it's an all-around very even game. This is all real data compared to the win rates expected from our regression. It's a little bit noisy, but what you'll see is that it's pretty much never a good idea to buy Rapier prior to about 50 minutes, where the narrative starts to switch and it becomes potentially a good idea if your team is at a net worth disadvantage. This scatter plot shows the same axes as before, where a red dot is a loss and a blue dot is a win. But this is all games, so we need to get rid of all the fake games we discovered, rage buys, intentional feeds, those sorts of things. Let's blink out some of those. Then on the other side, we need to get rid of Rapiers that were totally unused, that didn't contribute to a win. And for good measure, let's blink out all of the wins that were essentially guaranteed without Divine Rapier. 95% or more win expectancy. What we're left with, I think, is a very telling showcase of how Rapier is actually used. All of the red dots in the top right are games where somebody bought Rapier when they probably did not need to. The red dots in the top left are all losses where somebody didn't really trust their team to step up. There's fewer blue dots in the bottom left, which is really where Rapier's bread and butter is supposed to be, a last-ditch effort to make a win out of an impossible situation. It's clear from this analysis that there is a legitimate, even necessary place for Rapier in Dota. And I don't think it would make sense to just get rid of Rapier. But this analysis has really made me rethink its place in the game and whether it makes Dota better or worse as an experience. Giving one player the option to not only drag their team down, but boost up their opponents leads to a whole lot of intentional and unintentional abuse. I think if I were Ice Frog for a day, I would look at putting requirements on Rapier. Maybe that it can only be purchased after a barracks has fallen, or after 40 to 50 minutes into the game. If you made it all the way through this extremely long and tangent-prone video, thank you. I hope you found it as interesting as I did. And I'll leave you with a cautionary tale from, I think, my favorite Rapier game that I looked at.
Yeah, I'm so fresh like the morning. Mouth wide open like they yawning. Every time they see me, they in G-Shock. Homie, this is too far. Homie, I feel too alive. You can see me like Illuminati. You can see me like Illuminati. But I'm shining so bright, so bright. Don't come and try to share some of this light, no. Give me a beat and I control it like a maestro. Ladies on a mission, they be trying to get me wiped up. Shawty, wait a minute, can't tell if I like ya. Gotta make sure you know how to shake it like a bartender.